Alex. Hi there and welcome to episode 80 of the ADHD Adults Podcast. I'm James Brown, the man who will never adapt to being able to organise a podcast properly. And I'm joined, as usual, by the man who's early for everything apart from getting a diagnosis, Dr. Alex Connor. But we also have a very special guest who we'll introduce in just a minute. So, Alex, hi.
Sorry, I'm late, mate.
Was that a written gag? That was you acting, was it? Yeah.
That was acting. Yeah.
This isn't about you, this episode. It's about our special guest. And our special guest, I'm delighted to say, and actually before I introduce her, I've got to say, I think I first contacted our special guest maybe 9 months ago saying, we'd love to have you on the podcast. And in the intervening period, for a variety of ADHD-related reasons, it just never happened. And I'm so glad it finally has. Our guest today is Hana Walker Brown, the multi-award-winning documentary maker and author and ADHD activist. Hana, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's just lovely to have you on. It really is. I know. I can't apologise for it. It's all Alex, obviously. None of it was me, but I can't apologise.
I feel like it's shared responsibility on all parts.
Yeah, I think.
And
it
including
probably
me,
three
now,
people
not just you.
No, it's three people with ADHD. Trying to organise three people with ADHD is like cats herding cats. Really, it's not easy. So, how are you both? Hana first.
Yeah, good. I'm good. I've just gotten over a horrendous chest infection, so I was ill for the whole of January. Which was quite weird, being bedbound and not being able to do the things that stop me from spiraling. However, within that point, like that time frame, I feel I've made real progress with that. So for all the shit that's happened, yeah, I say that we'll see how the next week goes, but I'm doing good now.
Is that like new coping strategies for when you can't do the other ones? If you can't go for a run or something, is that the idea?
Yeah, it's mainly just me telling myself it's okay, which is probably also quite mental.
But no, that's a huge thing. It's that step towards emotional acceptance. Actually saying to yourself, you know what, I can't. Yeah, I'm feeling hyperactive. I'm feeling like I need to do stuff, but that's not my fault. It's fine. Yeah. Also, I have to ask Alex, how are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. Yeah, really good. No sign of our audience developing any kind of better taste in podcasts, and they're telling their friends, which is unconscionable. I think. And one of them sent us a letter, James.
They didn't. They didn't, nice. Did they? They didn't.
Oh, they are.
It's from Robert from Kidderminster. These are getting increasingly awkward.
I might send you a letter.
I think you should. It says,
please do.
It says, the letter says, I listened to your episode on the hunter-gatherer hypothesis that you're about to record. We got confused about the timing. We used to have a different hypothesis about James, but it turns out someone had just accidentally swapped our copy of The Contented Baby with The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Thank you, Robert. It's good.
That is easily the worst letter that my ex-father, not ex in the sense that he's no longer my father, but in the sense that he's no longer here, has ever written, Alex. Anyway, it's not about you things. We have an actual person here, so I'm sure we have a real letter, don't we?
We do, but we do. But I've forgotten to put it in the script.
Amazing,
amazing. Because of the thing. Amazing. So I'm going to read. I have got it here. This is the kind of professionalism you would expect. This is not the
top
first
level,
time
really, isn't it?
No, it is. This is quite funny.
Dead air, Alex. Dead air.
I know. You know, no one is surprised by this, surely. No one.
They won't be.
Right. It says. It says, a letter from Kakarot was, the podcast is really good, especially if you've just found out you have ADHD or you think you could have it. Brilliant tips and tricks, and mainly just understanding. I found out about it after work introduced me, which we're really, really interested in because it's very unprofessional. But thank you. We appreciate all your letters. Internationally, still increasing what is now obviously absolutely ridiculous. One country a week. It's just one, which is now 140 countries. The new country is, you changed it. The new country, see what you've done. The new country is the Maldives, where English is spoken, but that would be too easy, it says here. So I'll apparently use the national language of Devevi and say, and I apologize in advance for me about to cancel, a big Badaluviti Vara Ufaveja to the person, singular, who's listened to an astonishing 12 episodes from the Maldives, or one episode 12 times, we don't know.
Brilliant. Well done, Alex. You've navigated that with your usual aplomb. So not as usual, there's people in their 30s who talk about being old of a podcast, although 30s, according to Alex, doesn't need an apostrophe. Jesus Christ, I hate it when you edit the script. It isn't going to be a tragedy in 3 parts. Instead, we're going to let someone with some actual communication skills help us talk about the experience of getting diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, the fabulous Hana Walker Brown. If you're not familiar, Hana is a documentary maker, podcaster, The Beautiful Brain, and author who last year wrote an incredible book, A Delicate Game, which we will talk about later, which covers subjects including head injury and sport. So we've already said hello. So let's get to the first question. Mm-hmm. So obviously we're talking about late diagnosis, as we're all adults who came to understanding we had ADHD late. So when did you first suspect that you might have had ADHD?
I guess ADHD specifically, like actually having a name for it, about 9 months before my diagnosis. So it was quite late. It wasn't something I had a kind of name for, a reference for my whole life. Yeah. However, that said, I had struggled with things for a very long time that I just didn't have a name for, that I'd see doctors about. They'd prescribe antidepressants or anxiety tablets, or kind of every time I went, it was, you know, as it is with the NHS, 15-minute appointment with a GP. Here's the problem. There's no kind of interrogation. Take these. Occasionally, they'd give me 4 diazepam or Valium because I had terrible insomnia, which was like party time and really great, but obviously, you know, small doses because they're highly addictive. This thing I'd had for a very long time, but the actual kind of letters ADHD was not long before my diagnosis, and that was due to a friend going through an autism diagnosis herself and saying to me, I think you should look into this. And a lot of people I've spoken to, it was thanks to TikTok that they kind of had a name for it. I don't have TikTok, so maybe if I did, it would have been sooner. But it was someone else saying, and then obviously as soon as I kind of had that, it all started to line up. And that's when I could go back to my doctor and say, I think this is what I have. Can we look into this specifically? Because before then it was just kind of, what is the phrase, pissing in the wind. It was like there was no there was just nothing like tangible.
It's so the part of that story where a friend kind of suggested it to you, it's so common. It's what happened to me. Alex, you know, when he got diagnosed, said, you know, you're more ADHD than I am. And so many people will say that actually it was a friend or a family member, that when you understand what ADHD is and you can, you know, spot symptoms in other people and see that they may be struggling, it's quite common that people will often be that first suggestion, you know, will come from friends.
And I think also, like, my brother 100% has ADHD. It was almost like a running joke. He never got diagnosed as a kid, but all of his traits, and like the very kind of stereotypical traits, can't sit still, disruptive, struggled academically, like the very kind of boisterous, you know, the generalized traits that we'd seen. And I wasn't like that. So that was sort of the only reference for that. I was kind of, when I go back now and like really look at it, and like hindsight's a beautiful thing, I'm like, oh no, I did have some of those things, and there's other things. And like now we know the, you know, the disparity between male and female symptoms, and it like it was all there, but there was nothing that sort of suggested that could be what I was going through.
Is he all right with you outing him in a podcast?
Yeah, no, I've spoken about this before, and I had a conversation with him about it. He said to me, quite drunk actually, sometimes he'll call me and he'll be drunk and we'll have an emotional chat, and then I won't hear from him for like 6 months. He's fine. He's not like, you know, struggling or anything. but then he'll sometimes drop in. He's like, "Oh, you know what it's like with ADHD," or he started to kind of acknowledge it a bit. And I think it made me kind of sad for him in a way, because I guess there's kind of two things at play. Like, if he had been diagnosed, would they just have sort of given him medication from a young age, and how would that have impacted him now? Because at that point there wasn't a load of information, or has he kind of been better in the long run? But yeah, you know, each to their own, and you can't kind of speak to anyone's experience. But he's starting to kind of say things like, "Oh, you know what it's like with ADHD," or I don't know. It's just kind of a bit more acceptance, I think.
We've noticed that across the whole gamut. I out both of my brothers, and they definitely don't like that. So you did get a diagnosis. How did you go about it? What did you do? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember. I was actually on the ADHD Females podcast talking about this, because this is like quite a nuts story. So I was in the pandemic. I think a lot of people's symptoms exacerbated, and again, I still didn't have a word for this. And I was in London in lockdown 1. And the thing that really got me was that only leaving the house once a day. Even as a kid, I would go for these long walks. Like just this impulse, like I had to move, I had to get out of my brain in a way. And only being able to go for one started to feel very, very restrictive. I also do this thing where, like years ago, I'd call it stretching. And it's where if I sat still for too long, I'd feel like my whole body like contract. And it was almost like my brother had one of these, like a Stretch Armstrong toy. I don't know if you know that toy. It's like this muscle man, and you pull its limbs. And I was like, oh, I need to like Stretch Armstrong myself. Like, I just felt if I was still for too long, there was like all this energy. So obviously in lockdown, I'm going fucking bananas because I can only leave the house once a day. We were like drinking more, like everything was kind of becoming very, very intense. And so I moved to Spain as soon as I could in the second lockdown. And obviously, yeah, of course. So when I'd never lived on my own before. And, you know, the best thing about living alone is living alone. But the worst thing about living alone is living alone. And suddenly I couldn't hide anymore. Like there was I had to confront a lot of my shit and myself. And there was nowhere really to hide. Like when it's just you in a space, and we had a curfew in Spain, so a lot of the time we had to be in at night, so there was a lot of like, oh fuck. And it was in that time that my friend was seeking the autism diagnosis. And so once I kind of had a reference, I called my doctor, and it was almost like she was annoyed that I'd sort of found out what this could be. And I said, well, look, I need help with this. Like at that point I was really struggling, and I was quite worried actually about, you know, doing something stupid. I was in a lot of pain sort of mentally with this. And she refused. She said, no, everyone thinks they have this. And I was like, okay. And so someone else, I think I'd put something either maybe on Instagram, or I'd had another conversation, and that's when someone mentioned Psychiatry UK and Right to Choose. And I called my doctor back, who again was annoyed I found this route, and I said, can you do this? And she said, because of the borough that I lived in at the time, anyone that requested it, you had to go to a board. So they had other doctors from the borough, and you could sit around this board, and then they would decide who they would put forward. And she called me and said she wasn't going to do it. And I was like, fuck, okay. And then a month later, I was at my dad's. I going back to England for Christmas, and this woman called me, this other woman who I'd never met. Her name was Joanna, and she said, I was in that board meeting, and I categorically believe that I've seen all your records. Like we'd never met. She was like, I categorically believe that this is what you've had, because I've seen what you've struggled with, and it's not any of the things they've said. And she was like, I'll back you. I'll write your reference. Right. She was a GP. Never met her. She'd just been in that room, and then said, and then from then it was like, at that point, I think I hit it just before that big influx of people, because then about 2 months later, I had my diagnosis.
Wow.
And I'm like, she's an angel from heaven that saved me. But yeah, I just think, you know, that's the difference. She'd never met me, but she like laid it all out like that. She could see that there was a problem and that I needed help, and she gave it to me.
There's so much in there that resonates, and it will resonate with so many of our listeners. The lockdown thing, I think this perfect storm of lockdown, TikTok, and some celebrities and influencers announcing they have ADHD has led to the increased awareness. The mental health crisis thing, my diagnosis was after Alex said to me, well, whilst I was amidst a mental health crisis, you need to get diagnosed, you need to get this sorted. So I feel that viscerally. And then you've got that really thorny issue of the systematic barriers in the NHS to getting a diagnosis. I've been accused at a talk of bashing GPs, and we don't bash GPs. They do an incredible job. They're under-resourced, they're overworked, and they have very little training. Somebody at a talk, I give talks, Alex, do you know that, mate? Somebody at a talk I gave last night. Somebody at a talk I gave last night was a doctor, and they said they'd had 2 slides on ADHD in a lecture on pediatrics. And that's the level of training they've got. So it's not, you know, it's not completely, my brain's gone non-understandable. Alex, you'll correct me. To see that some GPs just
incomprehensible, James.
Whatever, mate. Whatever. It's not incomprehensible, uncomprehensible, or incomprehensible.
I've got a question. Hannah. I'm really with your like Stretch Armstrong thing, who's one of the Fantastic Five, not the dog, James. What is that? Do you have to, if you can't go for a walk to get rid of it, do you have to like waggle about arms and legs? Is it like a? So my brother did not know this was a thing. He's called it happy knees his entire life, and has only this week learned that lots of us do it.
Yeah, I had no idea, and it would also happen if I like got into bed and I hadn't done enough that day, or I still felt like slightly hyperactive. I'd be like moving around my bed like a mad woman. I remember my ex-boyfriend being like, "Oh, have you got your stretchy again?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, really bad." I'm like, "What?" Like all this shit I did, and I was like, "Why?" Like I just never thought, "Oh, that might be a thing." I was just like, "I'm just fucking so weird, and this is just how I live my life." And again, if you've got no one saying to you, I think there's a bit of a problem there. You're just like, oh, I'm quirky, you know? It's just not.
Exactly.
There's just no language for it.
You have to live with it. Yesterday, I had X-rays on my legs, and they told me to stay still. And I'm like, am I hyperkinetic? And I was waving my arms about because they weren't taking an X-ray on my arms, so my knees wouldn't wave about. And I had to explain this, whereas before I didn't have an explanation. I was just humiliated.
Yeah, that's it.
Carry on. I was interrupting.
No, I was just going to say, I think
carry.
When you don't have something legit or that validates that, there's a lot of shame in that, and there's a lot of, you know, I just said, oh, I'm weird, I'm quirky. It's, you know, it's always about you being different or, you know, less than. Actually, that's what that plays into. That's what played into to my inner narrative for a long time, which I think is why, not real, or it's just you, or there's something wrong with you, and then that can become quite isolating, I think, when you're seeing everyone else not do this and you're doing it and you're like, well, I must be the problem. And, you know, I think you guys say it a lot, but that's why awareness is so important, because a lot of people don't have the reference to the language for what they're feeling or why they're behaving a certain way.
They really don't. Just before Alex I'm doing the last question actually before the break, but just quickly, last night at a talk I did, Alex, did you know I did talks? Last night, Mrs. ADHD was with me. Mrs. ADHD was with me, and she hadn't taken her top up of her medication, and her hyperactivity was unbelievable. She was stood on the stage, swinging her legs out, doing lunges, then standing with her backwards with her feet off the stage, trying to do leg thrusts, and she was also talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And she said, oh God, I haven't taken my top up. And I went, no shit. And it really, when you don't take a medication and it really shows you what you used to be like before you took medication, it can be eye-opening. And for all the people out there that are medication hesitant, I get that. It's a personal choice. We are not drug pushers, not at least at this point in my life. And therefore, you know, it is a personal choice, but it can be profound. Right, last question before the break. And this could be a long one. After diagnosis, what changed for you?
Well, initially, everything. That clarity is very, very intoxicating, the relief and clarity. I fully hold my hands up. I was one of the ones bandying ADHD as my superpower to anyone that would listen.
Me too.
I felt very, I guess at that point, I was kind of naive about the complexity of the disorder and also my disorder, because, you know, even though we all have ADHD, their symptoms and behaviours can be very unique to each of us. But that initial relief was just, I mean, I was high. I was like, oh my God, this all makes sense. I'm a bloody masterpiece. Like, this is all, you know, all these things that, like, I'd sort of, like, I would work, like, almost to death, burn out, and then do it again. And I was like, it's just my artistic process. Like, this, I mean, I was hospitalised in second year of uni with burnout. And I just thought that was, you know, I just work hard. And because I've always been brought up to work hard, and then, like, looking back, I'm like, I worked so hard because I'm also overcompensating at the same time. But yeah, relief initially, and then maybe 10 months later, crushing realization that this was it forever, and I was going to have this forever. And it wasn't something to kind of overcome or conquer. It was like, oh no, this is it. And I think that's when I started to, again, get very, very down. There were points where, I don't want to, like, you know, be super morbid, and I don't mean it in a dramatic way, but there were points where I was like, I'm not up for this. I think, you know, not that I wanted to die, but I didn't want to live with that. And so there was a very, like, now I'm like, whoa, I can't believe that that's where it went. But at that point, there was a very real narrative of, is it worth it? Like, am I going to be able to do this? Do I want to do this? And I think, you know, for a lot of that, it was kind of wading through these murky waters of what if, or like what could have been, and the grief associated with that. And that is just not helpful for anyone. And then I did loads of ayahuasca, and I managed to come out of that, which, you know, I wouldn't recommend to everyone unless you're ready.
That's
but,
amazing.
You know, each to their own. Yeah.
I think it's really it's important to share that perspective, because there are a few things we often hear. One is that people get a diagnosis and almost immediately think, I've tricked the psychiatrist, that I haven't got ADHD, that actually I'm just all these things that I thought I was. And the other thing is that a lot of people report that they get worse. They feel like their ADHD's got worse. And what it often is that they're noticing their ADHD traits more. And then all of a sudden you think, oh my God, I'm more ADHD now than I was before. And that can lead you into that downward spiral of, do I want to 40 times a day, 50 times a day to do these things?
Yeah, that I definitely felt that. I felt at first I was, you know, and again, it's amazing to have an answer. It's amazing to kind of start to reconcile some of those things. And then it went the other way, and it just felt like everything was so loud. Like all those little things, like sometimes I'd feel a bit uncomfortable in a restaurant if there was too much, you know, like sensory overload. The music was too loud, or people were too loud, or everything was close together. And then it just became unbearable. And I remember meeting a friend for lunch, and she looked at me and she was like, do you need to sit outside? And I was like, oh, thank God. Yeah. Like I just couldn't be in there. And I was like, this is shit. Like, I thought this would help, and now it's just made everything worse. But then actually through that is now you have the awareness, you can start to find the tools. And then I sort of came out of that and then started to apply that. And I think now I'm, you know, it's not everyday sunshine, but I'm definitely in a place where some days are great, some days are unremarkable, some days are still shit. But my baseline now isn't despair. It's like acceptance and I'd say more peace, which is like, you know, it's a pretty nice place to be with it.
Is it peace, but still with a wild brain? What I would call wild peace, and James loves. He loves
I like that. I like
James
that.
hates
Don't
it.
encourage him. Don't encourage him. Peaceful wildness. And the other thing, what was it, Alex? That you were an unbridled stallion or something? Jesus Christ!
Oh, no, not that.
My therapist once said, "You're probably just a wild stallion, Alex. You can't be tamed." And like it's completely false.
Oh,
but I just there's nothing I needed to hear more at the time. It's like the hunter-gatherer theory. I want to be a hunter, but I mean we're not. But I'll take anything that makes me feel good.
I'd say this. You know, I'm still chaotic as fuck, but there's I guess it's more acceptance than peace, and not like, oh, everything is just so calm. Like it's still, you know, wild, but
always will.
There's a level of like, I guess there's self-forgiveness wrapped up in that, and there's acceptance and kind of a commitment to understanding rather than fighting against it.
That is amazing. I like the idea that you could create a self-help book called My Baseline Isn't Despair. Follow these steps.
The how-to.
Aspirational.
ADHD. Yeah.
I think that's a really good spot to take a break. So we will be back for more with Hannah in part 2. See you shortly.
Alex, hi.
Aight. What's up? Hello, Governor. Jesus already.
Welcome back to part 2 of episode 80 of the ADHD Adults. We are talking about adapting to a late diagnosis, but actually we are here to have a chat with the amazing Hana Walker Brown, who joins us. And I want to get straight back into it because, we spend ages on this. Hana, welcome back. So we've talked about diagnosis and things. No, thank you. So now you've got ADHD, you've got the diagnosis. When you do look back at your life, what kind of things make sense now, looking through that lens? I like that expression, lens.
Yeah, everything makes sense. My behavior, my artistic process, in inverted commas. I think also what I will say is, for all the kind of shit things, it's really important to acknowledge and celebrate the good things, because I think they often, they leverage some of that shit when it's hurled at you, which it is all the time with something like ADHD. You can't just kind of switch it off. It's there all the time. And actually, everything that I've done in my life hasn't, it's been there the whole time. It's not like I've just sort of put on this handbag of ADHD and now we're going out together. It's it's always been there. So I actually, I interviewed this author last year, Marianne Eloise, who has ADHD. She's also autistic, has OCD, and she wrote this brilliant book about it. And she used this phrase in the beginning of the book. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but she says "I am" rather than "I have." And I am being it is part of you and you are a whole person. Whereas I guess for a lot of the time when I was in that terrible space, it felt like it was separate to me. We were in this battle and I was resistant to it. And then as soon as I sort of was no, that is me, it just became part of who I was. And everything I've done has been it's me doing it. It's not me and then ADHD's watching from the corner ready to jump in and fuck it all up. It's no, you were there. So, there's things obviously things that have been quite difficult. I've had insomnia since I was a kid. That's really hard. I guess what I realized is I definitely have a bit of rejection sensitivity. So I'm off Instagram at the moment. I've been off for 5 weeks because as much as it gives me this dopamine buzz, there's also the rejection sensitivity, and it's just a horrible place to be stuck in if you kind of deal with those things. Things like empathy, I've made a career telling other people's stories and holding space for other people, and everyone used to say to me, it's a real gift that you have, and I was oh, I'm gifted, that's nice to hear. But I was oh no, it's more than that. It's actually just how my brain is wired. So there's so much I think that makes sense, and me as a person I think makes sense. I guess the only things that don't make sense that I'm sort of trying to let go of is why no one picked up on it, or why it wasn't sort of looked into, not from a personal perspective, but just more generally, why is it that women are excluded, or why is it that marginalized groups are excluded? What is it about the system set up that mean that wasn't picked up? So I guess it's less about me as an individual, more collective now, because again, I don't think it's useful to be in the past with things that you can't change, but actually really looking into what was going on there, and maybe how we can work together and maneuver that in a different way moving forward, so other people don't have to go through that. Does that make sense?
It really does. The good things especially connected. Do you see the good things as a response to trauma? It's learned through having to be resilient because you're as a direct response to being different? Because I see the first one, but I used to think it was the second. Yeah,
I don't know. I'm always slightly cautious about this word trauma because I know it gets thrown about a lot about like personal trauma, and I guess it's also like TikTok generation, Gen Z generation. Everyone's a coach, an advocate, a therapist, even though they're not. But I think
difficulty, then.
I think so. I think in any situation, like overcompensating is a response, right, to having difficulty. I definitely had this thing, which I've only really reconciled in the last year, where I only believed validation came externally. So I was like, win the awards, make the shows, write the books, like everything had to be for output. Like my work was only as good as what I was producing. And I know a lot of people will say, I don't have ADHD and I still feel like that because of, capitalism, society, whatever. But I was like, yeah, but to the point where it consumes like my entire life. I think that's the thing that's always really important, isn't it, with this is, you might have some of those things, but does it impact you to the point where, you can't live your life or your quality of life is significantly reduced? So there's a lot of that wrapped up. I don't know. I think, the difficulty definitely creates those behaviors. It's like chicken or the egg though, isn't it? Like which came first? Was it a difficulty or exactly. So, but I do think it's interesting and useful to kind of, obviously it's more complex than this, but to think about it sometimes as chemical, I think is quite interesting and allows, if you're really struggling, that's the thing that allowed me to kind of navigate it a bit better. Like with depression and anxiety, I think people, because of the way we've spoken about mental health and the way that it's kind of been, and not now, but certainly in the past, as a weakness or whatever, I think there's a lot of shame wrapped up in that, and people think it's them, and like it's chemical, like it's not you, it's you're not a bad person because of this, it's it's something that's going on in your brain. And sometimes I find that helps to think about it like that, for me, to be honest.
Agree completely.
I think there's so much in there again that people are going to resonate with, and for me, the bits that Alex has to point out that are positive, because I can never see anything positive in myself, are often a response, I think, to growing up being different, feeling unloved, feeling rejected, feeling lesser, not knowing why I can't do those things. So I found my own way, and I luckily stumbled into a career where I was kind of half good at it. And I never know whether, one of the things that Mrs. ADHD says about creative thinking, which we did an episode on, is ADHD's taken so much away from me. Don't let it take away my personality or my positives as well, because I think for some people you might just be creative or funny or hardworking, and I think, but many people then like to say, well, that's because of ADHD. Well, it might not be. It might just be creative or funny or hardworking. So next question is, Alex. I would say Alex and I, but it's largely Alex, often talk about kind of external and internal success. You are a very externally successful person. And one of the common myths about ADHD that we hear all the time, well, it's objectively true. One of the common myths is that you can't have ADHD if you are successful. So do you think that your ADHD has helped or held you back in your life and career?
Again, it's like this thing, isn't it, of, am I separating me, Hannah, the person, from my ADHD, or am I in like accepting that we're a whole thing? Because me, Hannah, a person, yes. And do you know what? I used to be like, oh no, I'm not successful. Not in like a weird, humble, fake way, but in a like, I never felt good enough. So when people would say that, I'd be like, oh, deflect. Now I'm like, no, yeah, I am, thanks. Let's like maybe spend the next 33 years embracing that rather than rejecting it and progress.
Oh, love it.
But I like, it's helped and hindered, like with anything, like, as someone without ADHD will make good choices and they'll make bad choices. I think it's definitely been harder. There's definitely been more struggles, but then also, like, I'm from a working class family. I never knew anyone to get a leg in the door or a foot in the door or whatever. And, especially in the industries I work in, the longer I've been in them for a very long time, and you do start to realize where certain people have come from. And it's not always we didn't always enter the stairwell at the same level. Do you know what I mean? Like, I started from the bottom. So there's a lot of that involved in that as well. And I guess, I'd have to say, of course, it has something to do with it, because I have something to do with it. My tenacity and my work ethic and that kind of. It's actually interesting. I've been speaking to a lot of people with ADHD recently, and a lot of us do have this kind of like wanting to change the world, like kind of activist thread through that's quite defiant and looking out for communities that aren't being served, whether that's kind of in a neurodivergent space or not. But I think that's also a working class trait where you kind of, you want to, when you rise up, you want everyone else to come with you.
It is.
So yeah, I'd say it has helped me because I've helped me, and that is me,
Yeah. I think
But
that's a really good answer.
Harder.
Justice sensitivity is commonly associated with ADHD. They don't know what if it's a learned trait as well. I think this concept of helping people is common with ADHD, but not if it means the same admin once a week that you have to do. So often we can't do that. We have to do other things like a ridiculous podcast or one project or something.
But that's helping people as well. I think there isn't a kind of, this is the only way you can be an activist. I think it's, even if you're making one person's life easier or better, or you're allowing one person to feel seen, I think we get so bogged down, especially, with the rise of Instagram, where everything is, we can like quantify everything. You're only valid if you have X amount of followers. You're only valid if you have X amount of listens. Like for me, which, it's not a good way to do business, but if you've helped one person realize something, like that's way more important to me than having 100,000 people download something and then maybe listen to 10%,
Absolutely.
But I think we have a skewed version of success. And I think I don't know, I think that's success. Like success is not how many people are like scrolling on Instagram. Sometimes it is. It depends who's paying, doesn't it?
I'm going to ask another question, if that's all right. So there was a paper on your thing of ADHD or do I have ADHD? About 2/3 of people with ADHD say they are ADHD, and the other third say they like me. I say I have it because I'm trying to get rid of it. You can't. But so having that in mind that you are ADHD, you've written this recent book, A Delicate Game, which deals with complex issues, concussion in sport, which with my other science hat on is something I'm interested in as well, social dynamics, violence against women. Writing a book like that, or any book, is a monumental task for anyone. If you've got ADHD or you are ADHD, how the flipping flop? Talk us through the process, will you, Hannah?
Initially, hell. I got the book deal before my diagnosis.
Right.
And what I think it exacerbated it because I was also working full time at this stage. I wasn't just kind of having a jolly writing a book. So it was in lockdown, which was quite good, to be honest, at that point, because I didn't have to go into an office, so I had extra hours to write and stuff. But I have never felt so stupid in my life, because I would sit down to write and nothing. I would procrastinate to a level I didn't even know was possible to procrastinate. 11 hours sometimes. And I was like, why can't I do this? And again, that then kind of internal monologue is coming in. You're rubbish, you can't do this. I'm watching everyone else who's writing books like, I write for an hour a day. And I'm like, how? Like, how do you do that? And they've got their beautiful desk space with their bookcase behind them, and I'm just like a mess. And I was like, this has got to be easier, like there's got to be a way through this. And I gave myself a really, really, really hard time doing it. The first draft I sent in the same month I got my diagnosis, and I do not remember finishing that draft. I think I was so depressed. I just had no memory of that month whatsoever. And then it was weird because the day I got my diagnosis, I went on Twitter, and there was a male author, and there's weird like serendipitous things that happen. And he had someone had done a big profile piece on him, and I think it was like the Times or something. And he basically was saying he got diagnosed with ADHD. I think he was like 38, 39, and it was right in his book that propelled him to get that diagnosis. And he said I was procrastinating for 11 hours a day, and I was like, oh, oh, that's like a thing. So that like, gave me a bit of comfort. And then actually, slowly, at first I didn't really tell anyone. And then I spoke to the publisher and I said, look, I've got this. And we worked out new ways of kind of working, not massive ones, because I still had a deadline. I still had to get a book in. But like when it came to the kind of mock-ups of the pages and all the referencing and stuff, if it was a new system, I asked them to demonstrate over Zoom, because if they just gave me instructions in an email, I wouldn't even engage with it. And then they'd be like, where is it? I'd be like, I don't know. I just don't understand this. So at first I was like, oh, I don't want to be like, oh, can you do this? I've got ADHD. But then in the end, I was like, you have to, otherwise, A, you're going to fuck this up. And B, you're going to start to have quite a difficult relationship with the people that are backing you. So it was really hard. It was really, really hard. There's a lot of admin, obviously. There's a lot of new systems. We had, because of the book subject is quite contentious, we had a lot of legal reads. So 7 actually with lawyers where we would have to go through things.
Mind, Hannah, did they mind when you plucked up the courage, and it is courage, to say that email, I'm not going to understand that. Can you help me? Or
no,
did they mind?
All. They were like, no, they were like, we'll get on Zoom, it's fine. They were very kind about it. It was me. I was the one that was like, whoa. So I'd say it was very hard, to the point where once it was done, I almost was like void of all emotion. And now it's almost like I can't believe I've done it. Like I've got a pile down here because the paperback's going to come out next month.
Exciting.
And sometimes I'm like, fuck, did I actually do that? Because it was so hard. Like I'm not going to, I mean, I don't know. I don't think writing a book is ever easy. I think if you look on any author talking about it, everyone will say it's difficult. I'd say it's exponentially more difficult when you have ADHD. And that is just because of it fucking puts all your symptoms on steroids, all your behaviours. It's like they've just fucking injected, and they're like way massive now. And you're
the diagnosable ones. If you literally look at what we're not good at, it's writing a book. It's all of them. The executive function of planning, everything. Being on our own and no reward.
Yeah, no reward. Like I need rewards all the time. But I did it, and it's brilliant. And it's helping people, and I'm still here to talk about it. So all in all,
it's an incredible achievement. I think even finishing a book which didn't get published when you've got ADHD is an achievement, but to write a successful and powerful book like that is fantastic. Right, I'm going to annoy Alex now. We do just have time for the usual game of What's James Lost, Forgotten, or Mislaid this week. So,
we've got a guest.
Yes,
come on.
Yeah, I know exactly. So, because we've got a guest, you've got 2 options, Hannah. You can pick the topic, and then you can get to go first. So, there's 2 topics, and that is tea and glasses.
Tea.
Right, so famously, I struggle making a cup of tea, and as usual, it went wrong the other day. So you've got 3 options for what I did, which was a very ADHD thing about my tea. So did I, A, put the tea bag straight in the bin instead of the cup of tea? Did I, B, microwave a cup of tea, which I always have to do because I forget to drink them, in a cup that had a metal handle, and then obviously all the sparks and the panic that I'm blowing my microwave up? Or did I, C, put the wrong sweetener in, which is one that I bought that actually tastes like dog shit and therefore ruined a cup of tea? So 3 options: tea bag in the bin, microwaving a metal cup, or wrong sweet. Alex, you're not going first. Shut up. Hannah's going first.
I know. I just want to.
I'm really hoping it's not C, because that's crap. I'm going to go B, because that sounds quite exciting at the same time as being
microwave metal.
Okay, Alex, what do you think?
I think that it isn't B, because James isn't allowed metal anything. Sam gives him plastic cups.
Oh, you've got
I'm making that up. I just make it.
Oh, right.
I've got a system where I just say something horrible about James. Yeah. I don't think it's tea straight in the bin bag, because James just has a like dung heap outside his kitchen that he throws everything like a dirty little like Stig of the Dump. So I'm saying dog shit sweetener.
Oh, I hope it's not
You're both
that.
wrong.
He doesn't look happy.
Oh, it's A.
You're both wrong. No, you're both wrong.
You got a tea bag straight in there.
Yeah, this happened this morning. So this is the container that you can't open because of your feeble child's hands, Alex. And I opened it up, picks up a tea bag and just chucks it straight in the bin. I'd poured the milk and I came back and I'm like, that's milky water. And then went, where's the tea bag? I've definitely got it out and looked in the bin. I'd just thrown it in the bin.
I've done it so many times, and then I've stood there and looking at it with a confused look of what even are you?
What's gone wrong?
Exactly.
Yeah, what? Why aren't you even real? That is perfect.
Exactly.
I hate that loss.
So
I love that you did it.
Yeah, so I think that makes it 4-4 for this year, doesn't it, Al? No? Is that right?
4-4. Yeah.
Brilliant. On that fantastic note, we'll take a break. You're not winning, and we'll come back for some more questions in part 3. See you in a bit. Trumpet. Hi there, and welcome back to part 3 of episode 80 of the ADHD Adults podcast, where we're talking about adapting to a late diagnosis of ADHD with the wonderful Hana Walker Brown. So the next question is for me, which means it's good because nobody has to listen to Alex's voice for very long. Yeah. Do you have any tips that you think helped you, which you would offer to people to help them adapt to a diagnosis of ADHD?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for me was community. And I don't mean the one I already had, but like ADHD community. I think I spoke to you quite early on, Instagram, Twitter, those sorts of places. For all their sins, I think they're really good places to connect with people. I guess, obviously a lot of symptoms can be oversimplified for the sake of infographics and videos and stuff. But I think just having or seeing yourself reflected in the experience of another was really helpful. Being able to talk about it, I think often, I'd say more times than not, this isn't everyone and I'm not generalizing, but people close to you, I think, can sometimes struggle to accept it, or they don't really know what to say because we don't have a vocabulary for it. My family were like, no, you don't have that. But there was a little bit of reluctance to engage. And I don't think that's because they didn't believe it. I think it's because they just didn't know what to say. And I think close friends as well. Or, I know I have a lot of friends who are actors and creatives, and a lot of them are neurodivergent, but they've had it for a while. So it wasn't like I had this like new thing, but they've had it since they were kids or a lot longer than me, so it wasn't new. And I just would talk about it all the time, and people do make space for you, but I do think like the ADHD specific community was a real lifeline. And I guess the other thing, which I don't know, it's weird, isn't it? I wish I could be like, follow these 10 steps and you'll be fine. But it is a bit of trial and error, and it's about really learning not to sort of be hard on yourself when in those error spaces. And I learned quickly the things that helped: exercise, like not drinking alcohol.
Both work. I hate them both.
Yeah, but then it was like, you have a choice now. If you do them, you're going to feel good. If you don't, you're going to feel shit. That's on you. And so it is that kind of, I don't know, self-awareness and self-compassion, hugely important. Again, it's a practice. I think people just want the answer, and I don't have an answer, but it is about making sure you give yourself the space to kind of explore those things. But I'd say initially being able to talk about it in a safe space, and there's a lot of community groups as well, all up and down the country. I've spoken to quite a lot of people. So yeah, I think that is a good first step, because I think if it's all internal, which it often is, and you've got no outlet or you've got no one to speak to, it just gets louder and louder and louder.
In the spirit of top tips, I'm going to drill into something you just said. I was joking about exercise. I adore it. James doesn't, but I know loads of people struggle with exercise and alcohol because obviously intellectually, if you've got ADHD, you're going to feel better tomorrow. But tomorrow doesn't matter. Tomorrow might as well be nothing. So what do you do personally? And it isn't advice. It's just what do you do personally to make feel good tomorrow a emotionally rewarding motivation for the next 10 minutes or hour, what do you do then? How do you do
Yeah, I mean, and also, like, I haven't nailed it by any means.
No, of course
If, like, I know I'll feel better if I know I need to do some. If it's like I don't like the idea of going to a class, I'll go for a walk in like Hampstead Heath or one of the parks near me. I have like an accidental accountability buddy, my friend Darren, who's a personal trainer. He like does like motivational videos, and if ever I'm feeling like I don't want to do it, I always think, what would Darren do? And then I'll send him a video or a voice note, being like, I almost didn't go, and then I thought, what would Darren do? And it's almost like having someone in your brain that you don't want to disappoint, which again is probably quite messed up. But sometimes I don't do it. Sometimes I'll just sit there and be like, no, I don't want to do that. But I think now I've got to a point where I know what's good for me. And I know it's not worth it. And, you know, even with sleep, although this week is fucked, but I'm like, if I exercise, I know I've got a better chance than if I'm just like working relentlessly, or, you know, I'm procrastinating, or I'm doing anything, all the things that like I have to do but aren't necessarily good for me. And one of the things that really helped, and I've been doing it for about 13 months now, is cold water swimming. And I know it's having a bit of a moment, and everyone's talking about it. But it's because it really helps. Like, it really does help. And I haven't been able to go for the last 4 weeks because I've been ill, and I really feel it in my body when I can't do that. So I don't know, it's finding the things that work for you. If you hate running, don't force yourself to go for a run, because that's never going to work. Like, I like there's an exercise class called F45, which I really like, because it's 45 minutes high intensity, but the exercise changes every minute. So it keeps my attention, and I'm not bored ever. Like, you're constantly on the move. The trainers are really encouraging. So you kind of have to figure out what your thing is, because if you're going to do the thing that you hate, like, the chances are you're probably not going to go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to add that cold water stuff is, I live in Germany, where hundreds of years, this isn't new here. It's not trendy here. Everyone does it. It's absolutely
weird,
standard.
that thing though. I think there's a lot of, you know, when we kind of minimize stuff to a trend, and especially in like a wellness space, I'm like, is your issue with people taking care of their health? Like, is that what this is? Because that's essentially what you're saying. Like, obviously do it safely, and, you know, there's some people doing it for the gram, that's fine, like, let them live their life. But it's like generalizing something as a trend, when actually for the first time I think people are finally advocating for their own mental health and going, actually there's a better way. Like, we should be celebrating that. Like, we should be, you know, busing people to cold water spots to help them, you know.
I always think that about climate change. Like, if it's all bollocks, I mean, we've still got better air, right? What's the downside? It doesn't make any sense to me. It's the same thing. You idiot! You've got like a healthy body.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right, I've got a question, and you can choose to answer either both, none, or one of each. Which is, what has your ADHD taken from you, if that's possible, or what has it given you, if you prefer, either biologically or through learned? I think we've dealt on a few of them. If you had to like sum up one that you were really was obvious.
Do you know what? I think the biggest thing for me, which I'm still grappling with, is self-esteem. And I think that is a massive one for me. I think I'm getting I'm getting better. But again, I think that was the thing that from a very early age was present. And I think untreated or ignored, it just kind of seeps in. And so it's so much part of your makeup you don't even realize. Like, it's just how you move through the world. And again, overcompensate by always trying to prove that you're better than the last thing. And it was my coach that said to me, how long you spend on the shit you fucked up. But I didn't swear, I'm just swearing, but that's the essence. How long you spend on the things that you messed up, and how little time you spend on the things that you should celebrate. Like, my book, it came out and I was like, that was good. And then I'd be like, I did this really stupid thing. He's like, what the hell? And I was like,
You're describing James.
Yeah, it's really...
I know. I was about to say, I mean, I have zero self-esteem, and the odd thing is, because I make self-deprecating jokes in a kind of a reverse way. So I'll joke that I'm more handsome than Alex or more talented than Alex. Some people think that I genuinely think that. And I've had people in the past say that I'm arrogant. Actually, when I left one university, the gift that I had was a picture of me that says, thinks a lot of himself underneath. And I just thought, what the hell? Because I genuinely think nothing of myself because, because that 12-year-old boy that's still in there, the rejected, slightly unloved, lonely, isolated 12-year-old boy. I saw your face and Alex, and you wanted to do a ding. That is very much me. And it's almost impossible for me to get over that fully. I've had therapy, and that's really helped me kind of show that 12-year-old boy where I am now, and the fact that actually things did get better. But I have zero self-esteem.
I
can see your face, Alex. Yeah, it is ding.
I am a 12-year-old boy. Pathetic.
It is. Right, so last question then. Pardon me, my voice is going. Obviously you work on so many things. Is there anything you're working on now you'd like to talk about?
Yes, there is. I was going to launch it this week, but then I did get a bit fearful about going back on social. So I'm like, no, do it when you're ready, probably next week. But I'm starting like a Substack blog and then a podcast, which will come out in March under this kind of banner, Late to the Party, which is about navigating neurodiversity as an adult. I figured, there's a lot of stuff out there about this, obviously you guys, but I figured that the more people that talk about it kind of honestly and thoughtfully, the more chance there is that things can change. And so, again, the thing that really helped me was the experience of other people, like sharing my own, like the way that I kind of reconcile stuff in my head is writing about it or sharing it or like observing how the world is meeting me within that. So part of it is for my own exploration. But then I've been interviewing incredible people all over the world who were diagnosed neurodivergent as adults in kind of written profile pieces, and then a podcast which will come out slightly later, because I just felt there was a space for it. And I think in a just kind of thoughtful and intimate way as another resource, and so people can start to kind of own their experiences a bit. I know we've had like a weird year where everyone is insistent on speaking for us or invalidating this in a dangerous way, I think, because not for the people that have it now, but for the people that might, that then don't seek a diagnosis. And whether you self-diagnosed or you've been clinically diagnosed, if you reject any part of that, you're not going to seek the tools to help you. So I think that's really important. So that is kind of a passion project. It's not sort of part of my work, but I noticed how people respond when I do talk about it. And I figured, there's the more that's done in this space, the better, really. With nuance, I think nuance is essential. I think I definitely toyed with how useful is another kind of white, creative, successful woman adding to this already saturated conversation. There is a lot of white, creative, successful women currently who are kind of dominating this space. But then at the same time, why not? And I think that kind of real exploration and understanding of it is important. So, and obviously it's not just about white, successful, creative women, and bringing in everybody into this conversation.
We really can't underplay working class, though, Hannah, as well. I mean, all of those. It's one of the biggest barriers in the world outside of probably race and gender. It's probably the third one, right? Maybe other disabilities.
Yeah, totally. And again, I just think I've always said this and sort of underlined a lot of my work, but someone has to go first. And if you're courageous, you give other people permission to be courageous too. And that isn't like go and write a book or go and save someone from a burning building, but it's like it can be a real brave thing to own your own narrative and your own story. Really, because I think for a long time we're used to people telling it for us. Parents tell us you were like this. Sure, like outwardly that's the experience, but internally, like we've all had our own shit going on. And I think also the way that the world responds to us and other people respond to us is based on their shit, not always ours. Like, so I think actually having the courage to just write it all down and be honest about it. Like, some days are good, some days are shit. Not kind of. I spoke to a photographer recently who is autistic. And she was like, I'm just so sick of the cute traits doing the round. Like, you know, these beautiful cards that are like, these are the traits and these are the symptoms. And I'm like, yeah, cool. It's like a baseline maybe. Not all my symptoms are in that diagnostic criteria. Not all like your symptoms are probably in there. And it's not going to be like a definitive how to navigate the diagnosis, because I think that's impossible. But I hope it can maybe start to example a few different paths, and then people decide which ones they step down and what might help. And again, just empower people to do it for themselves and advocate for their health. I hope.
I think that's.
I don't know.
I think that's.
I hope
It's brilliant. The more voices we've got, in this space, sharing good information, making people feel that they're part of something, that they're not isolated, is great.
Yeah. Although I do have to like write posts every month, but
not
so that's
yeah,
also a test.
yeah, not your voice, Alex. We don't want your voice.
Yeah,
in this
you
space.
can. We're gonna swap
Yes.
this round. We're gonna return the favour.
We are, yeah. Yeah, I think
Maybe
that's
9
brilliant.
months.
I was just pointing out that James said the more voices the better, and that means he has to admit that my voice is of value, which he would never.
I don't have to. There was an asterisk.
I'll admit they're both of value. I feel like the mediator now in some weird divorce situation.
It is. It's very much like that every week. Right, that almost brings us to an end. So I just want to quickly say, Hannah, thank you so much. A, for the massive patience you showed in the 9 months it took us to actually organise this.
No, it's fine.
And B, for coming on and sharing your experience. We normally give a product of the week. This week we got 2. First of all, it's Hannah's book, A Delicate Game. And then secondly, it's Look Out for Late to the Party, which will be coming out soon because we think it's going to be brilliant. That was episode 80 of the ADHD Adults Podcast, adapting to a late diagnosis of ADHD with the brilliant Hana Walker Brown. If for some reason you enjoyed this episode, why not support the charity on the link provided? Because otherwise, Alex is going to have to sell one of the 60 acres of land he owns around his German castle in order to provide funds for the charity. If you want to get in touch, contact us on the socials at the ADHD Adults or through the Discord community forum. We will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Trigger warning, klaxon, 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 big klaxon. Trigger warning, klaxon, 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 klaxon.